Bob the Builder has been confidently fixing things for years, but nothing could prepare him for this. A building under construction collapsed, and a metal beam went right through the back of Wendy's head and through her eye. Bob was distraught, consumed by inner rage and depression. Something snapped in him. He began to unleash his wrath, all against the construction zone, bringing everyone pain who surrounded him, even worse than the kids on site's incidents. Eventually, everyone else came together to trick Bob into falling into a hole and then burying him alive in order to stop him. All seemed done, but as Bob was trapped underground, a demon came to his presence and made a deal with him, allowing him to escape alive as long as he could host the demon in his body. Bob agreed, and soon he became a powerful giant creature only known as Bobpachi Mishima. He began to glow with a purple reddish magenta aura and became much longer and bigger, and he grew an extra sharp mouth where his stomach is. Bob re-emerged onto the construction zone and began to continue bringing his wrath upon everyone over his grief. However, it was here where he decided he could no longer stand living without Wendy, and that something must be done for it. He went over to find Wendy's mutilated corpse, picked it up, and thought to himself, "Can we fix it? Yes, we can." Bob began to reconstruct Wendy into a giant metal body, applying her human face onto the face of it. The robot constructionism was huge and had metal limbs and giant claws where the hands should be, and it had a jetpack support system. Wendy's face was at the top of it, and it was thereby deemed Wendy Metal Face. The two decided to seek vengeance in their new corrupted forms for what had happened to them, and the construction site was no longer the same. They began to unleash death upon it all, mutilating everyone into a bloody mess. The kids on site crew tried stopping him by rolling a steamroller on top of them and scooping them up with a crane and throwing bananas at them to make sundaes. They proved to try to be a threat to the duo. However, ultimately, they were overwhelmed by it, and Wendy Metalface intimidated them by taking her claws and stabbing it through a banana. However, it was Bobpachi's powerful aura that began to entice and attract some other powerful opponent. Kazuya Mishima appeared before them, saying, "How are you still alive?" And Bobpachi Mishima looked at him in a powerful flexing stance and began to intimidate and taunt the puny Mishima. Kazuya then laughed smugly at this display, and it was then where he pulled Eddie, not the Tekken Eddie, but the Ed and Eddie, over from off screen, out of nowhere. He was like, "Whoa!" And then the two began to fuse, just like in the Lost Tekken cartoon episode, and they once again became Eddie Mishima. Oh yeah! Donning the body of Kazuya Mishima and the skin and head of Eddie and eating a jawbreaker. The two began to fight as Eddie Mishima kicked and punched at Bobpachi Mishima. It was like, yeah. And Bobpachi was growling and trying to block his attacks. And it was then where Wendy Middleface decided to intercept by stabbing Eddie from behind, or at least attempting to. She flew over them as they were busy, and she was like, I just love the good smell of a foolish dance and a bunch of jokers on there. Take this, Minato boy, and flew over to try to stab. However, it was then when her attack was blocked and grabbed by an even more enraged force. It was Evil Lou Pickles using the power of the Satsuki no Hado in his wrath, which suppressed even Bobpachi's and Wendy Mental Faces in a rage, with the hatred and pure disdained bitterment of corrugated bran puffs. The two formed an unlikely alliance, one that could only result in bloodshed, as they began to brutally beat and mutilate each other to hyper-realistic bloody pulps. Wendy Metal Face's eyes were bleeding out, and Bobpachi vomited out a bunch of teeth and dark hyper-realistic blood. Eddie Mishima got a splinter on his hand and began screaming bloody murder. Evil Lou paused and started crying, Sprout! It was then where they had enough, and Bobpachi Mishima, after trying to throw all of his once construction equipment friends on top of them, decided to try to use it to his advantage, and thought, this needs fixing. You see, as Bobpachi Mishima also used his friends to salvage her parts for Wendy Metal Face, he also employed a human fusion feature on top of them, and it was then where Wendy Metal Face began to piggyback on top of Bobpachi's back, and this would surely increase their power, doubling it so that they could take on both. All seemed lost. However, it was at this point where something was missing, something was forgotten about. You see, an inner timer in Wendy Mel's face went off, remembering something, a time that they had forgotten, which was more like breakfast and dinner time, Pilgard. You see, it was then where Pilgard, having been forgotten by them, appeared wrathful, vengeful, and it was then where Pilgard jumped on top of them and began to cloud Wendy's eyes entirely, and she screamed as Pilgard began to disassemble and remove her face off the metal face, and then, after he was done slowly ripping it off, Pilgard then devoured Wendy's face, ending her, leaving only a lifeless giant metal husk of a body left. It fell off of Bobpachi Mishima, who remained in shock, and it was during then where Eddie Mishima and Evil Lou were like, whoa, and they wave dashed over and finished him off with a giant double uppercut. Shoryuken style, even though this is Tekken and not Street Fighter. And Bobpachi Mishima began to scream and crumble into dust as how he was like, I returned to the dirt of the construction zone. It was then where Eddie, Mishima, and Evil looked at each other, and Evil let out a huff like corrugated brand puffs, and they hardly headbutt each other, but more so in a way of, I'll get you next time, and he said something about Reptar cereal and hopped off, something as a source to calm him down. It was then the three remaining kids on site workers who were left alive began to jingle like, yay, and their shirts were all bloody though, and they had Sundays, however, and then Eddie popped off Kazuya Mishima, and he was like, whoa, and he was angry and annoyed and shook his fist at Kazuya. He's like, you sure wrote my money, and he ran off in his stupid style to go continue with the scam he was doing with the other Ed boys to try and trick Johnny into giving them a quarter. Kazuya Mishima crossed his arms and also huffed and stared coldly at the kids on site construction crew, and Tailsaw was also there eating a banana just because he can and sensed it, and he was like, and walked off, but also looking up towards the sky behind him, sensing that there's probably an evil aura that was not completely undone yet, and yet to come. The end.